You, my dear sir, are guilty of the Culpabliss error.
Beer for Real Men. The Culpabliss Error. A presentation of Universal 7 Governance and Management System.
Thus, I offer you a new word, culpabliss. It means, culpable ignorance of consequence. An acronym for, culpable blindness to systems, sensibility. Society must bring it home to managers and ministers, that the culpabliss error will not be tolerated any longer. Reductionism is the technique of thinking we use. Despite its spectacular success, reductionism is also responsible for the appalling mess in which we find ourselves on every side. The technique is not systemic. Indeed, it is anti-systemic. When explaining this difficulty about the reductive technique to youngsters, I usually point out that if you take a radio set to pieces, you can certainly understand how it works. But you never seem to find the voice. The attribute we are most interested in disappears.
Another way to describe culpabliss error is to say that you are acting dumb. You are aware of possible negative consequences of your acts. However, given that there is no hard connection between what you do and what is going to happen later, then you can pretend that you are off the hook. You are not alone in the culpabliss error. This is a lack of ethical concern that has been going for quite some time. It is present everywhere.
In management, reductionistic thinking has flooded our planet with more than 100,000 industrial chemicals that have been tested for carcinogenic effects, but not as mimics of estrogen. Ecological mismanagement had been wiping out one species a day, but now the latest United Nations report has 150 to 250 species becoming extinct every 24 hours. In science, a root cause of our present discontents has to do with the reductive character of scientific explanations, and a resulting epistemology that regards consequences as inherent qualities of static systems. The young men who violate the law in fairly small offenses, when he is committed to prison, such a young offender will himself be violated. Everyone concerned in penology knows that this is a certainty. But we imagine the public outcry, national and international, if a judge passing sentence on a persistent minor offender ordered 3 months of daily gang rape.
Or, pretending that an adversarial system of justice guarantees that the whole truth of the case in question will emerge triumphant. When the truth is that both contenders will try to outsmart both the judge and jury.
The ethical question of whether or not a decision taker or policy maker should have known the disastrous outcome of that decision or that policy may or may not be a criminal matter. So, it is easy to understand that lawyers do not want to admit elements of argument that might well have the effect of becoming entangled in their basic categories.
Men and women who pretend not to know the consequences on young boys and girls of growing up without the presence of a father. In spite of clear warnings by, in this case, Barack Obama. In medicine, doctors are well aware of iatrogenic diseases, where they fix one problem and create another, perhaps even worse. Or a doctor will order superfluous tests, or recommend a vaccine, when this particular patient would be better off without it. At schools and universities, educators and faculty are acting as if they did not know the high degree of influence they have on unsuspecting students, and the consequences that brainwashing them with extreme ideologies will have later on their worldview and professional future. How about computer whizzes, who care nothing about the addictive nature of the social network applications they design, and the effects their use has on young children? On the other hand, some programmers create algorithms that will favor a certain ideology. Politicians who pretend they do not know the consequences of sending thousands of mail-in ballots, without any supervision, and total disregard for who and how is going fill them in, and send them back, to be counted as legitimate votes. There is the case of an elections official, who will certify as valid an electoral result that has absolutely no statistical validity whatsoever. You surmise what will happen, but you ignore it. However, you can be sure that you are incurring the culpabliss error when you resort to one of the following excuses: I knew nothing about it. Or perhaps, when you say, it was not my responsibility. Last but not least, a more perfect excuse is, I was only obeying orders. There are others. How about, this is how we do things here? Or better yet, the law is on my side. The Supreme Court has said that abortion is not a crime. Legislators, who continue to pretend that a debate and a simple majority vote is enough to produce wise and worthy legislation. In the case of the press, not doing their work of monitoring government, Stafford asks of them a lot. He says,
"It is in the absence of hope that the professions will detect their vulnerability, that I call upon the free press to establish public recognition of this particular category. A weekly column, for example, instancing the worst examples, under a heading they should have known. But the media may have to swallow hard in pursuing this proposal. They are hardly strangers to Culpabliss themselves. Society has invented the ethical concepts of the prudent man for accountancy, the reasonable man in law, and the practical man for business. And then, there is the hypothetical man, who will suspend disbelief about something that is evidently implausible. It is fairly easy to see that the one root cause of the problem lies in a reductive technique that is virtually powerless to handle an integral system. The second root cause has to do with the kinds of models that we use in managing our world, the image we have selected from a myriad sensory impression, endowed with coherence, and elected to call reality. These models of social, political and economic so-called reality cannot be mistaken for reality. Firstly, they are oversimplifications. In cybernetic terms, they do not exhibit requisite variety. Secondly, they are usually out of date. They are surrogate worlds. How did we get to this point? The most famous of the believers in change was Heraclitus, working in Ephesus, best known for teaching that everything is in constant flux. It was he who wrote that you cannot step into the same river twice. Parmenides, for example, taught that all change is inconceivable, its appearance an illusion. Understanding is a product of modeling, and the useful models change very little over the millennia. It seems to me that the crucial models arise from experience, as mediated by a central processor, the brain, which has not changed in millennia, and that therefore, understanding is timeless. Thanks to fads in the usage of technology, this does not look to be the case. Thanks to fads in the language of philosophy, this does not sound to be the case. But it is the case. I am thinking about the direct and indirect consequence distinction, and the issue of inseparable consequences, which turn out to be just a bit separable, after all. The notion is horrifyingly imprecise. When Aristotle got his teeth into Zeno's paradox, which must have been 100 years later, he knew that something was wrong, but pronounced himself unable to say what it was. He should have realized that to freeze a changing variable artificially, and then to debate the status of that variable as if it were characterized by its very stasis, rather than by its relative rate of change, is an inoperable model. What is needed is calculus of variations, in which finite differences converge on a limit, as the increment diminishes toward zero. That leads to the concept of an instantaneous rate of change of the function with respect to the variable, which is to say the derivative of the function. Society is trapped in an ethical version of Zeno's fallacy. The model that society is using by no means recognizes this reductionist thinking. It is making the mistake that Aristotle made when he failed to account for incremental change. And this comes down to a failure to perceive a decision as an instantaneous rate of change, which is to say a derivative of a function formulated with respect to time, instead of an event, defined as frozen in time, like Zeno's arrow. We have been discussing a very special form of ignorance. This is the ignorance of consequence, which, according to my examples, has really no excuse. That this kind of ignorance is so common is due, I have been contending, to the pervasive use in society of a faulty ethical construct, one which has no systemic referent. And whether it was Aristotle's fault or not, the fact is that the faulty model is deeply ingrained. We talk all the time about systems, but the systemic attributes of the system are not represented in our descriptions. The notion of the public, meaning you included, is quite static. The word system usually carries no systemic connotation. To recognize consequence in a policy or decision, we need not analyze the worth of its construction, but to synthesize its systemic evolution. An understanding of the way systems behave, and the underlying principles they obey, even when they are probabilistic systems, has to be developed in the public consciousness. It is not that the knowledge does not yet exist. It is called cybernetics. I must point out a major conclusion. It is that the Culpabliss error derives from a failure to understand cybernetics, which is the science of the regulation of large, probabilistic systems.
Thank you for watching. Please share if you liked it.